Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Happy that so many of you joined who were with us in Dallas, and I know there's some new people on the call as well. We're going to have this opportunity to speak with Brother Nadeem, who did the evaluation and hiring and retaining of principals, that whole conversation in Dallas. That was really important, and I know we didn't have enough time to cover everything that needs to be covered in that area. So hopefully this follow-up session will be able to answer some more questions for those of you who were there and did try some of the things that Brother Nadeem mentioned. And for those of you who are joining who weren't with us in Dallas, this will give you an opportunity to learn a little bit about what Brother Nadeem has to say. He is he's a board member, board chair still, or board member? I don't know now. Has that changed?
Board member, yeah. I recently, since 2007, was a president. I just stepped down this past spring, inshallah. So
okay,
trying to
but
be
you're
more
still on the
supportive.
board. So
Still
one
on
of
the
the
board.
things, so I was fortunate to be able to visit the school, Noor Academy of Knoxville, Tennessee. And one of the things I noticed when I was there is the really great relationship that the board has with the principal. I don't often see that when I visit schools. And it's very open communication, very supportive relationship. And so we invited Brother Nadeem to talk about how, hiring and retaining and evaluating a principal, because I think he's got the background and the experience to be able to talk about that particular topic. So Brother Nadeem, I'm going to let you go ahead and begin because I want to make the use most of the time that we have together, inshallah.
Is it okay if I, alhamdulillah, have an opportunity to introduce Brother Nadeem?
Yes, go ahead. Sister Ezra is a board member of CISNA. I don't know if we have any other board members on the call right now, but go ahead, Sister Ezra.
Okay, thank you so much. Alhamdulillah, thanks for the introduction, Sister Sophia, and we'll get started. As Sister Sophia was saying, that alhamdulillah, this session is about the post-retreat session for the hiring and evaluating of the principals and the head of school. And alhamdulillah, we're excited to have Brother Nadeem Siddiqi, who is joining us today to talk more about the session. And this is, as we say, the post session. And it's sponsored by the CISNA. We're so excited. So CISNA is a vision to have every Islamic schools have equitable access to high quality education, alhamdulillah, and our focus is on accreditation, professional development, and resources for the schools, inshallah. So with that, just a quick introduction of Brother Nadeem Siddiqi. Brother Nadeem Siddiqi grew up in Knoxville, where he has lived since 1977, and he graduated from the University of Tennessee with a degree in economics in 2002, and from Taysir Seminary in 2016 in its first class. He serves on the board of directors for the Muslim community of Knoxville, Noor Academy of Knoxville, Taysir Seminary, and the Association of Muslim Chaplains. He serves as adjunct faculty for Taysir Seminary, where he teaches a course in community governance and services. Ustada Nadeem serves as a Muslim chaplain in the local prisons and at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, for the Muslim Student Association. With that, I'm excited to start with Brother Nadeem, inshallah. Brother Nadeem, please take it away.
Jazakallah khair, appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Let's start with the Fatiha, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Good seeing everybody, inshallah. We ask that it be beneficial to us, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for any mistakes we make and to accept from all the principals and board members here and people working in his cause for his sake, inshallah. We ask you to purify our intentions and to accept from us whatever we do. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good to be with you guys. If you're able to share your screen and you're in a place where you can do that, I appreciate it. Sometimes doing Zoom sessions, one of the trickiest parts about it is just the psychological aspect of staring at a bunch of black screens all the time. It makes it a little bit more communal and kind of connects them a little bit. But if you're not able to, because of you've got something going on and that's not appropriate for you, feel free to listen in, inshallah. But if you're able to, inshallah, do your best. Just a couple of things, housekeeping, just to give you some idea of how it's going to go today. I'm not sure how many of you guys attended the Dallas session. If a lot of you did, then we don't have to, try to recover some of that material. We just go straight into some of the questions and discussions around that talk that we had with a little bit of refresher. If most of you guys did not attend it, inshallah, we try to recover it briefly so that everyone has at least, a baseline of what we're talking about, so we don't rehash, that talk in totality. Also, just getting a feel for those of you guys who are, on the board versus those of you guys who are administrators or principals or leaders, school leadership, just to get an idea of what side of the coin we're looking at as we talk about this topic in particular, because the topic evaluation and hiring, it depends on what side of the coin you are and the perspective and the questions and like the ideas that you'll have. So those are my two first questions that I have for the group. How many of you guys were, let's just start with the negative question. How many were not in Dallas? That would give me a better idea. How many were just not in Dallas and did not hear this presentation? We got one, I see. I know our brother from Japan probably. Also, did anyone else? I've got 1, 2, 3 that I'm seeing did not hear it. Anyone else? 4, I got another one. 5. Okay, so we got about 5 or 6 or 7 maybe that did not, maybe about half the group. The second question I've got is around how many of you guys are not board members, that you're in the school working, like you're working in the building as principals and leaders, or as whatever other role versus board? I'll assume you're board, unless you're, say that. So how many of you guys are not necessarily on the board per se? Or is everybody here a board member essentially? We're dealing with mostly board members. Seems like mostly board. So that gives us, another perspective. So I'm going to go through the presentation briefly. Ravi, are you able to screen share that presentation from your side?
I wasn't able to open it. Could you
Okay.
send it, in a different format? For some reason, I'm not able to open it. Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to read through it a little bit. It doesn't.
I can open it if you like.
You have a copy of it?
Of the Dallas one? Yeah.
I don't know if they're able to share it though.
If you can make me a
co-host.
a co-host, that'd be great.
Okay.
Actually, it worked.
Oh, all right.
So, do you see it?
Yeah,
we're able to see.
So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly just to give us a baseline. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. But this was kind of just an idea of the way folks answered this. As we started off with this slide, and which is evaluating, kind of was over the hiring process. Maybe a lot of folks were looking at the evaluation process. And so we'll spend more of the time on the evaluation side today as well. Inshallah, we go forward just a little bit. I'm going to hit just some of the high points. And the idea with this slide, with every action, innamal a'malu binniyat, was just this idea of just making sure we understand what we're trying to accomplish with the evaluation process. In brief, sometimes we come to the evaluation with a little bit of an agenda, maybe, or we come to an evaluation with already have come to some conclusions. Maybe we're trying to find another principle or something, and we're coming to the evaluation in this way, or we come to the evaluation through the lens of our corporate lives, whether we're in work someplace in Google or we work at the hospital, and we're bringing that kind of to this, and we're kind of, because that's what we know. And so that was kind of the idea, is like, what are we trying to accomplish there? This next slide was going into that a little bit. Well, here's some of the reasons for evaluation, and and a lot of it had to do with accountability. Ensure that the performance, the principal of school is not evaluated. Ensure the growth. Ensure this. Ensure. When you say ensure a lot, the idea there is that we are trying to bring a lot of accountability and compliance into the situation, academic performance or policies and procedures, et cetera. So that was a lot of what we were seeing, and we'll go into that a little bit. And then what I was putting this up against is this idea of din al-nasiha in the next slide. In the next slide, din al-nasiha, which is the idea a lot of times in evaluation is, a good evaluation is a good nasiha and taken as much with a lot of, and you can't give nasiha unless it's coming from a deep place of love for the sake of Allah. You love this person for the sake of Allah, and in doing so, you give them a sincere nasiha. And in the sincere nasiha, it's taken really well, and it's a great form of communication and a great form of alignment and a great form of bringing alignment to the organization, everyone kind of understanding each other's perspectives and figuring out where we can improve, and what the plan is. But again, the concept of nasiha, sincere counsel, starts from a place of deep love for the sake of Allah, not from this relationship of I'm over you, I have power over you, I demand this, I demand that. So we just kind of keep this from a spiritual, religious perspective, that where are we coming from with this? We want to come from a place of deep love and for that sake. We went some activities, and I'll just talk about the activities versus doing them. The questions I asked, and you all could take a look at the benefit of the activities just by what we're presenting here. If I'm going too quickly, just, ask me to slow down, and we'll go into this a little deeper at each level. The activities were around, I asked the board members that were present, and I'll ask you guys here as well, for those who are not there, like, how would you run a very demoralizing evaluation? Like if I were to give you the instructions, like, why don't you run an evaluation that's very frustrating and demoralizing for the person being evaluated? What would that look like? And I say that because in doing so, in that exercise, sometimes you can see what we should not be doing and what we end up doing. Like a lot of times we'll see some of the things. So a lot of criticism, a lot of, complaining, not a lot of, constructive feedback, a lot of blame, a lot of things of that nature. So in the evaluation process, if we were to demoralize someone, we would basically not thank them for any of the good work that they did. We would amplify the defects. We wouldn't pay attention to the great aspects of what they do. We wouldn't, empathize with how hard the job is to begin with, and some of that. And the pre-mortem is like, if you fail at an evaluation, what do you think went wrong before you actually even do it? And those were some activities that we did that we're not going to do now for the sake of just moving through it a little bit. We go to the next slide, inshallah. And so we talked a little bit about two processes, and one of the process, in that is a formal evaluation process, which is, I think, a lot of what this question's about. Like, so the talk, and Asisna asked us to talk about this, a lot of it probably has to do with professionalizing the Islamic schools in America. And if we zoom out a little bit, we look at the educational apparatus of the United States. There's a lot of talk at legislature levels about dissatisfaction with school districts, and they want to have more school choice, and these vouchers are being pushed. And at the end of the day, there's an opportunity for Islamic schools to really, advance to the next level. At the end of the day, if we're producing very high quality education, our communities and our children and our future endeavors will succeed. And the idea is we do that through these Islamic schools. And the idea for CISNA is to accredit them and to help them and support them and make them better. And one of the ways we do that is having really professional behaviors and evaluations at this level. And so when we talk about the formal process, and I'll spend a little bit more time here, it's about getting that done really well so that it's productive and beneficial, and it's helping everybody. It's helping the principal and the school leadership. It's bringing happiness to the parents and to the board. And it's a source of great progress versus a source of frustration. When we look about that formal process, the question is, who is doing the evaluating? And that's a question we need to ask ourselves, in the sense that, is it the board? And if so, is it one member of the board? Is it the president of the board? Is it a committee? Is it the entire board? How is that conversation going? Who's qualified to do the evaluation in the first place? Meaning, what level of academic, pedagogical, educational experience do they have in the realm of both management as well as the art and science of education itself, to be able to do a great evaluation? So if I just come, as a businessman, let's say I own restaurants and I'm a business owner, I'm wealthy and I donate a lot of money, and I'm the president of the org, or an engineer who worked at XYZ enterprise, and I'm coming and I'm bringing all of those ideas of corporatism and capitalism and the technocrats' mind to the whole process. Like, how is that going to look in the evaluation? Are we going to be speaking the same language? Are we going to be doing things productively? Is the evaluation process formal? Is it official? Is it documented? Is it on paper? Is it just something casual? Does everyone understand what's happening? Are the processes very clear before they happen? Does the principal know, the parameters on which they're being evaluated and judged ahead of time, or do they're finding out kind of ad hoc through just conversational things? Is it a conversation that goes both ways? Or is it just one person writing all things down and talking at one person? Or is it something that the person being evaluated, the school leader, has a participatory role? Again, we talked about this in the last few slides about, is it helpful or demoralizing? And then the other question is it a question of development or accountability? And I'm going to stop here with this and talk to the group a little bit. We don't need to go forward on the slides yet. We just cover what we covered so far. But is it developmental orientation or is it accountability orientation? So let's go back to the group and cut off from the slideshow temporarily. We'll come back to it in a minute, but we'll just take this first chunk of slides and try to have some discussion and answer some questions, inshallah, since there was a decent number that weren't present. So talk to me.
Could you, sorry, yes. Brother Anas, could you stop sharing the slides for just a minute, I think is what Brother Nadeem is asking, so you can see the.
Yeah, let's talk to everybody, inshallah. Yeah. I
had a question for you, if you don't mind, Brother Nadeem.
Yes, please.
This last one where you talked about, is it developmental or is it, what do you, can you talk about the difference there a little bit?
Yeah, so accountability comes from a mindset of ensuring things are done. It's a little bureaucratic, it's little legalese, it's a little bit, and it's not wrong all the time. Accountability is this idea of like, do we have policies and procedures? Are things in place? When you come through accreditation, a lot of times you're checking boxes to make sure things are happening and making sure that those are there. And that's great. But we want accountability in the sense that a certain degree of standards and safety and appropriateness is critical, with this idea of making sure things are happening as they should happen, making sure policies are followed, making sure we're growing the way we want to grow. But sometimes it can feel very like one directional, like I'm over you and I'm making sure. And it sometimes can feel almost a little bit derogatory in the sense that there's an assumption that the person isn't doing them or those things aren't getting done, meaning that's a low baseline. It's kind of like the minimum standard. It's like a low baseline. When you're looking at it from an accountability standpoint, the question is, how high can you go? If you're just looking at the baseline, like the lowest common denominator, like, did we get this done? Well, if that's what we're worried about, then there's no aspects of growing and creativity. So on the development side, the idea is, you're a great leader, you're a great principal, you've taken us very far. Now, what are we working on? What are you working on? What are we all working on ourselves to take it to the next level, to take the school to the next level? Like, what's that? Because if we're just looking at accountability year over year, actually, you're not going to see any progress because the baselines are generally not going to change. Like, what were the test scores in X grade and what was this and what was that? But the idea of development is like, okay, what are your strengths? What are our weaknesses collectively? What's my weakness as a board member? What do you think yours is? And sometimes it's not like me telling you what it is. It might just be like me asking you what you think yours is, because, we all could improve. And instead of saying, hey, I think your weakness is communication, You need to communicate better, which is a little bit more accountability. It might be, hey, what do you think you could work on? What are some areas that you're interested in working on? What do you think are some gaps? In putting those in position to where, or, just going through opportunities to grow, which is putting people in situations or in courses or in experiences. Like when we send Reem to CISNA to do accreditation, that's developmentally helping out quite a bit as she gets to see what other schools look like and then compare herself against those schools. So in many ways, development might be, paying for someone getting a master's they may not have in educational leadership if that's a gap. Maybe they're a great leader. Maybe they've gotten a lot of work-wise, but they don't have the academic credentials that maybe you guys want them to have, and maybe we're willing to invest in that. Or maybe there's some other kind of skills that they're looking for in particular that would help them be a greater leader that they themselves have been wanting to do, or that maybe are articulated that. So developmental approach is like, how can we keep investing in our people to make them better? Accountability approach is like, let's check off the list to make sure these guys are not doing anything wrong. I think you're muted, Sister Sophia.
I was going to point out Brother Muhammad has raised his hand. I think he has a question.
Okay. Yes, please. So yeah, someone can keep an eye on it. So
so I'm from Minnesota. Sorry, I didn't attend that Dallas. I really wanted to go badly, but something came up and we could not travel there. And then this is the first time I'm hearing, so Jazakallah khair. And when you're discussing about the evaluation, my head was around like, usually when you, and I am kind of like a corporate guy, so when you're doing evaluation, usually it is against the work plan, right? So I just want to understand that, when we are working with a principal, then, we will, kind of like document a work plan for that individual. And then when we do the evaluation, that is going to be against that work plan, right? Am I thinking way off, or?
A little bit. So the one thing you want to take a look at, and this is something to zoom out and look at, right? So when we zoom out at the American corporate landscape, we look at the awe of production. We're in awe of how much they produce, right? So we're talking about GDP, we're talking about metrics, we're talking about data, we're talking about results, we're talking about wealth. But if we really zoom out, we look at it, we see a lot of broken families, we see demoralized people, we see people who are frustrated, we see a lot of anxiety and depression. You look at academia, for example, and you could be impressed in awe of the universities. But remember that when you look at look at chemical engineering, for example, a lot of the pesticides and food colorings and preservatives or the fossil fuels, a lot of our problems are produced at the same places that produce some of these great results. So it's kind of like you get something, you lose something, right? So when we talk about prophetic community, we talk about prophetic methodologies, spirituality, religion, the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we have to ask ourselves, like, so what's the goal here? And one of the things to understand is one of the goals of school is to produce happy, socially and emotionally safe and strong kids and families and people, right? So if all these kids get into Harvard, and they're all miserable and unhappy, that we wouldn't consider ourselves a success just by that, right? Like that would not be considered a successful school, one that produced a lot of families that were broken, kids that lost their Islam. So in some ways, happiness and corporate happiness and culture are like a critical component to what you're trying to produce as a school in particular, right? You're trying to produce kids that want to go to school, not just kids that can score high in math alone. Do we want them to do well in math? Sure. Though we may want to question that as AI replaces all the jobs that we're producing them for, getting them ready for, but that's a different conversation. But in the basic of it is, and that's what I want to get into today a little bit, is like, what are we really trying to accomplish here in that evaluation process? At the end of the day, is our staff happy? Is our principal happy? Are our kids happy to go there? Are parents happy? Are people and not happy, and then all of a sudden they're scoring poorly and everything, like academically we give up, right? No, that's not what we're talking about. But we are saying that if you only use a model of accountability and measuring against this and that and the other, and I think we do measure. Like, one thing I will say to your question is that you're not wrong. You should have organizational goals. You should measure against those organizational goals. and you should want to improve against those organizational goals. That's factually true. That we're not going to concede that. But at the same time, how we do it matters. How we do it matters. And I think that's where we lose touch. I think we all agree that we need organizational goals and metrics that we need to measure and look up against. However, how we communicate, articulate that, how we interact with one another, that's where I think we get the science, but not the art of it, right? So the science of it, check. The art of it, And I think that's what I would make a case for in this conversation is the adab, the diplomacy, the love, the compassion, the empathy, the understanding, and to some degree, the competency. It's very helpful if you have some background in education or pedagogical approaches. If we're talking about Marzano or Reggio Emilia or Montessori or high scope, like the fact that those words mean something to you versus they're completely over your head, right? So if we're talking about different systems and the pros and cons of them, like STEM is a system and there's pros and cons to it, right? It's not all, unicorns and butterflies and things like that. Like if you understand, and then to understand what are we trying to accomplish, right? Like as a school. So I would say that it's the art, it's a nuance, it's that those soft skills that are harder to measure, that are subjective many times, because it's very easy, to go. That's why a lot of board meetings are finance meetings, because it's easy to measure numbers and say, yes, we failed, no, yes, we succeeded. And it's very satisfying, gratifying to see those things that are very tangible that we can kind of sit inside of. It's very hard to look at subjective stuff and try to figure out, like, is it beautiful? Like, well, that's an opinion, right? Like, and it's very hard to measure that. And therefore we don't spend a lot of time on that aspect of the culture building process. And just some of the things I want to talk about today, and I'm going to throw them out there, as a backup of that question, and we'll continue on of some of the old stuff, is I would say that setting culture and just that idea of culture is not a small aspect of the evaluation process. Is that, like, are we evaluating what's happening, what the culture, and we can't put that all on the principal. What's the culture of the board, and then remember, the board is evaluating and selecting the principals. So what's the culture of the board? How's that translating as a culture of the school itself? What's the culture of the human resource, like the team itself? And how's that translating downstream, right? So if we're heavy-handed in one way, that might just trickle all the way down to the student level. Good question. Hope that was helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. That was good.
Other questions while we're here before we kind of look back at that last thing? And as we're talking about, we'll talk about formal evaluations a little bit, but I would just say that a little bit of that is about the subjective stylistic approach to the whole process. And also just things like, are we measuring things like the culture in our evaluation? Like, is that part of the goal here? So let's go on to the next slide on the formal process. And these are some formal processes. So I spend a little bit of time, because I spend so much time on the subjective side of this and the art of it, it's important to throw in the science of it too, right? So here are some like tried and true methods of formal evaluation systems, because hopefully you're not making them up, right? Like hopefully you're not just creating your own system by itself. Hopefully you're at least basing it off of something, fairly well established and used, and then you're customizing it, for your particular situation. And these are some examples: Marzano, the Interstate School Leaders Licensure Consortium Standards, Strong Leadership Effective Performance Evaluation Model, or a 360 feedback was a little bit more ambiguous a little bit, and then team, we use team in the state of Tennessee, and some component of self-evaluation, which is this idea of asking the person, well, why don't you evaluate yourself? Just tell us what you think you're doing really well at, which you feel like you could work on, both as a school, as a leader. Like, what's our school evaluation from your perspective? What's your personal evaluation as a leader, as your role in there? And then we talked about SWOTs a little bit as a methodology. For those who are not familiar, they're basically the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, or threats from an Islamic perspective, we're like the mashallahs, the astaghfirullahs, the inshallahs, and the la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah in this SWAT. We go to the next slide a little bit. And here's kind of like, again, I'm talking, this is the formal stuff for those of you guys who missed it. And for those of you guys who are doing this, hopefully you're doing all of this anyway. But these are sample domains in which you're kind of assessing the leader. The leader's being assessed on leadership and vision. It's on the school climate and culture. These are kind of things, the style and effectiveness in motivating staff, students, and community towards achieving the goals, and on and on. These are like standard sample domains that you'd see in those other slides. We go down, I think I've got some more sample domains here. Instructional leadership, management and operations. These are all kind of going into these domains. We go down a little bit further. Community engagement, family engagement, ethical and professional behavior. I'm not reading all the bullet points below. Student learning and achievement, feedback from staff and stakeholders. And as you can see, it's comprehensive, right? So when you look at the domains, these are pretty massive structural pieces, and hopefully everyone's gotten into that. So let's stop for a second and talk to everybody again, because I think those are some samples, both of types of formal evaluations as well as domains that we use for that. But hopefully those are things that you've seen before, you're familiar with. Hopefully you've got something like that at your school, like you're not completely winging it. So winging it is kind of like you show up and someone just says, I got to evaluate the principal. There's not a lot of preparation or thought gone into it. They're not using any kind of structure or system that everyone agrees upon, meaning the board and the principal, everyone's kind of on the same page. And it's kind of like this, surprising. So the idea is this should be kind of something you formalized and it's in your protocols. And this is something that, the principal is really well aware of, that she's being evaluated or he's being evaluated on these areas. And you're going through these domains in a systematic way. In fact, your principal can fill it out themselves, and then you can just agree or disagree with it to some degree, like meaning it gives more agency to the person if they're able to actually fill out their performance evaluation in that manner. And then you can come in and say, well, here's one area where I think we might be not totally aligned in our expectations of what's happening. And whereas if it's one-sided, like you're doing the whole thing, there might be some difference of opinion there. Plus you'll get more information. If you have the principal do some of that themselves, the school leader, you'll get an idea of what they're thinking, versus if you do it all, you're basically communicating a lot of what you believe, but you're not gathering any information, because if they disagree, they may not disagree with you publicly, like especially if it's really off, and therefore you're kind of losing a lot of information. But I'm going to stop here. Is that something you guys are familiar with? Is that something you've seen? Is that just new? Like, oh, I never saw any of that before in my life. Yeah, I've got some questions from Brother Anas and Brother Salim. We'll go to Anas and Brother Salim then.
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khair, Brother Nadeem. I'm want to reflect on the culture topic, and this is something. So I sit on the board for our school, but the culture thing is in my professional side of the ward. There's a lot of emphasis on culture, and I worked for different corporates before. There's some that have the paperwork, have all maybe the best structure there, but when it comes to applying that, it's not an easy thing. It's a big topic. Now, fortunately, with this organization that I work with, there's a lot of emphasis, but it comes with a lot of work. Like I was a part of these. We call them like culture ambassadors, and they pulled up team members from different groups. Like we had some from HR just to facilitate the sessions. We had board members. I'm talking again on the professional side of the business, and we had people like from operations, maintenance. They have a select, representing different groups, and it took us like over a year of meeting over and over. And sometimes we come in, we don't have a clear agenda, and things start popping up because these people all believe and wanna, build a great culture. And then you have, the daily things, and and then there's a lot of things around us, right? Like COVID hit, now we have things changing in the market. So my point is, that's something I know from the business side of things. But when it comes to schools, do you guys have any trainings or any workshops or anything? And those are, like you touched on, like non-measurable things, and maybe start somewhere. Do you have it's not going to be apple to apple, like from professional to school side, but what's your recommendation to start building or putting the seed and working towards a greater culture with some emphasis on particular things?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. I think for me, culture looks a little bit like this. It's on the one hand, the organization itself, the board and the leader and the parents to some degree in the community, whatever that group of stakeholders is, has to really decide what kind of school they want. Mm-hmm. Is it one that is really pushing a military discipline, for example? Like they want kids dressed in uniform and they want straight lines and they want adherence and they're articulate, or is it a creative school, or is it one that's college preparatory, or is it one that's really preparing them to do exactly? So the first idea is just understand, like, and that has a little bit to do with our other brother who gave the workshop on play to win. Like he's really focusing on like your identity and how you, like, what is your organizational identity? And you got to build a culture around that identity, right? So sometimes you might have a high degree of like discipline that looks a little bit like, militaristic. And then some places you have more creativity and and so the question is, what does it look like first and foremost, right? And once you've got that, you kind of have to hire culture. Like a lot of times we think that we can kind of communicate culture, which we have to do. We have to communicate culture. But a lot of times you have to hire culture and build around that. What do I mean by that? Like if you're looking for people who are if you're wanting an organized culture and you're hiring unorganized people, it's very hard to give a PowerPoint presentation and make that change, right? Or if you're like, let's just say cleanliness is important to you. But the people you hire, if you go into their cars, the cars are a mess, then you can give a PowerPoint presentation about the importance of cleanliness and the sunnah of cleanliness and tahara. But at the end of the day, when you hire people, you are bringing the culture, you're bringing ingredients to your cookie. So when you're building your cookie, you're going to get flavors based on what you put in there, from sugar and salt and chocolate chips and walnuts and all this stuff. Every hire you make is an ingredients to that cookie. And schools are not strong link systems, they're weak link systems. Like basketball is a strong link sport. You basically, if you have the best one or two players, you can have tremendous improvement in the team. Whereas, sports like soccer or schools for that matter, you're only as good as your weakest player to some degree, right? And so the idea is, as you're building your team, and I'm not talking about firing people, that's never what we do, but there's going to be natural attrition that happens anyway. And when that happens, when you fill those spots, are you filling it with folks that are kind of in line with what you're trying to build? If it's nurturing and loving, then your teachers need to be nurturing and loving. If you follow, like, if that's your stated goal. And so that's one part of it. The other part of it is communication, which is making sure that it's clearly communicated what the expectations are and what kind of school you're trying to build. And therefore, and at that level, there is some degree of benefit to PowerPoint presentations or just any kind of workshops that help communicate what our intention is. And a lot of people are flexible and they can go with whatever you are expecting. And so the idea is, and then development is not a small thing, because we don't have a lot of firing and hiring going on all the time, but we should be investing a lot in development. I think that's one area to look at. Like, look at your payroll costs and look at how much money you're spending developing your team. And sometimes that's kind of like a big lost opportunity. Like, you're willing to spend $1 million in payroll and you got like $4,000 for professional development, and you're kind of under investing and you're just wasting all that money on payroll without getting more out of it that you could have got out of it had you maybe upped that PD to 20,000 or something like that. And so sometimes, like, if your teachers are not going to any conferences, they're not attending any workshops from folks that are really good at what they do, they're just doing what they did last year for the most part, right? Like they're trying the best they can, but no one's investing in them heavily. And so the idea is, look at your payroll, look at your PD, look at the relationship between the two. hopefully that gives you a little bit of the culture side.
Jazakallah khair.
Brother Anas.
Assalamu alaikum, jazakallah khair.
Salam.
There's just one comment, one question. There's a book that helped me kind of to hold the conversations, both professionally at my work and also as a board chairman at our school. It's called Crucial Conversations When Stakes Are High. So I really recommend. I know most of you have read it. For those who have not read it, it's really good. Just to set the tone whenever you want to hold a conversation with anybody in school. So alhamdulillah, that was helpful. The question I have from those evaluation systems that you mentioned, which one you recommend? There are a lot of them, but which one has well-structured rubric that can help make things? I know it's subjective, but how can we make it a little objective? So
so if you go back to that slide real quick that lists some of the ones I listed, and I didn't list all of them, I just listed some of them, right? So we at Noor Academy at our school have used Marzano in the past, and we're currently using Team. The reason we're using Team is it's what the state of Tennessee use. All of our public schools here use Team to some degree. And we have folks that we hire from those systems, and a lot of folks are familiar with it. Our principal's familiar with it. Our principal of the high school is familiar with it. And so the reason we use it is it's just familiar, right? And so there's some familiarity to it. Marzano, our previous principal was trained in Marzano, and that was what she was familiar with. And so I wouldn't make any strong, statement in regarding to the formal side. Now, we haven't talked about informal, and I think that's where some of this becomes helpful. But, if you look at, let's say you take one of these, whatever they are, you look at the self-evaluation component and you combine that with a SWOT analysis, which is kind of like a collective inventory of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the school. I think in many ways, you're going to cover all your bases. If you go to the next slide, these are all the domains here are pretty common in all of them. There's a commonality to this, meaning these are not things that one has and one doesn't have, right? So leadership and vision is a common domain, style, evaluation style of the principal, effectiveness and motivation, school culture and climate. These are common domains. They shouldn't be things that are one doesn't cover culture, right? It shouldn't be that way. Or if you go to the next slide, some of the stuff that people really look for is management operations or instructional leadership, right? These are common domains. So I didn't take any of these domains from any of those particular things. I just took these as general, these are just general student learning and achievement. How are the kids scoring on their standardized scores and whatnot, or what's the college admission rate looking like? And the feedback, from the staff, what do the staff feel about their leader? So these are common domains. And so I don't think it's necessary. I think what it does matter is just look at what other schools in your area are doing if you want some sort of, or look at what style you've chosen. In the case of Marzano, it's a whole system of education that, it's one piece in there. So I think I don't really, on the formal side, I don't feel strongly about any one particular system. It's just, you look through it and you learn a lot, and maybe if you want to build your own at some point, you can just borrow from all of them, but it should be done collectively in a way that everyone agrees upon it, your principle, and don't change it every year, right? This is not something you want to do when you're doing this, when you're doing that, when you're doing this, when you're doing that. Leave it in place for 4 or 5 years and have some consistency, and then if you feel like you want to make an improvement or change or tweak, you can do it. You can tweak at any time, but a wholesale change shouldn't be done, all the time. I know you asked for a particular answer, but that's just how I feel about this. On the formal side,
that's great. Thank you.
On the informal side, let's go to the slide below. Let's go past the domains a little bit, and this is a little bit about board self-awareness. Again, we all come with our biases, right? My degree's in economics, right? And so, and you heard some of that. I'm at the seminary. I'm a chaplain. I had some experience in healthcare and in business. And so we all come in with some of our biases, and we just have to be careful how much of that bias we're bringing to the system and how much we're in and out of. So there's some commonalities, which is organizational science, right? Org science generally applies to all fields, whether it's healthcare or engineering or business or schools. There's a certain organizational science overlay that is cross-applicable, and it has to do with culture and motivation and demoralization and accountability. So there's a little bit of that. However, a lot of these industries, you know, have created subcultures and things that kind of can not move that easily from one to the other. So just be careful if you're in one field to be how you're bringing that to another. So look at what's going on as a board, because remember, if you're having issues with the principal, remember you hired them in the first place. And I've seen boards, like there's one slide in here, I think it's a slide that has to do with the big graph. There's a big graph down there, like there you go, this one right here. And like how many principals has been at your school in the last 10 years? And you know, we've got, look at 5, 3, 4, and 5, you know, that's about 40%, about 45% have had 3, 4, or 5 principals in 10 years, meaning half of Islamic schools have no stability in their leadership. And sometimes the very boards that are dissatisfied are the very boards that hired the people in the first place. So then who's really the problem? Does that make sense? Like that's something to think about, is like, if you're having that much turnover, then at some point you gotta look in the mirror and just say, hey, wait a minute, we're the ones that keep hiring these people, right? Like we had the system, and I hate to use a stupid analogy, but I'll use it anyway. The University of Tennessee football was in the gutter for quite some time, and the board and the president of the school were always upset. And I'm like, but we're the ones that are hiring them over and over again. Like, why do we think that, you know, maybe it's not the principals? And so that's something to think about, is like this kind of turnover. And I think for CISNA's perspective, on a data perspective, and this is just something, this is our cohort. This is not the national Islamic school. This is just the people who attended in Dallas that answered this. So we'd have to do some studies on what's actually happening on a national level. Maybe it's different than what our subset looked like. But if it's true that this is extrapolated out to the whole country, this is kind of like a goal for CISNA, is to have more stability at the leadership level in our Islamic schools, because it's not healthy to be running that much turnover over and over again. So that's just something to look at. We go back up right below you can just stay at that slide down there, that below it, you know, what's causing the turnover, since we just discussed this, you know, looking at the mirror, and whatnot. But the one below it, sorry, the one below that, so, you know, what kind of culture is that creating, and who picked the previous leaders? So that's a little bit of what we talked about. So I'm going to stop here, talk to you guys a little bit, and then we'll go on. Questions around a little bit of that? I do want to maybe spend the last of it giving a little bit of, I don't want to go to, you know, we'll probably end up just redoing that presentation, but any questions real quick, and then I'm going to kind of jump off course a little bit and give you some informal stuff. Sister Sophia, you had something?
Yes, I do. You know, you mentioned about how we'd like to see some stability in leadership, right? We want to see principals staying. So retaining is very important. And I understand that, and I think schools are trying. One of the issues we have is not finding anyone to take that position. People not wanting the position because of the stress involved, the low pay, the type of work, sometimes the relationship, the board principal relationship. Those are some of the reasons that we're seeing people not wanting to become principals. And I'm wondering if you have, what you've thought about, like when we talk about sustainability and continuity in a school. So I know you guys do a great job. I know you have a great relationship with your principal, and you know she's supported and so forth. What might you recommend? I know you said CISNA should try and play a role in this, in trying to see how we can help our schools in terms of finding and retaining.
So one of the things so as a board, so we'll answer a bunch of questions all at once, and this being a big one. One thing is, our principals that we've had didn't apply to us as principals. Like none of the principals that we've hired, whether it was Principal Amani Shurbaji, who's a phenomenal principal, Reem Abdurazik, and then Sean Blevins, who's we're working with now to cultivate and develop. Like none of these guys were teachers, all of them. We saw in them some leadership characteristics. We saw in them some heightened degree of communication and intellectual ability. We saw in them some, some genius of some level, and we invested in them and cultivated them over periods of time that look like 10 years, right? Like when we're talking about cultivation, we're talking about like investing in someone for 5, 7, 10 years until they're ready. I think for a lot of folks, they're just not patient with that process because that just seems like a long time away. They want to hire someone today ready out of the box. The issue is if you look at your boards, like some of your boards have a decent amount of turnover too, right? Like there's people on our board who've only been there 2 years and they kind of wouldn't have the context to hire anyway. Like if I were to take a new board member and say, okay, hire the next principal, that's kind of a daunting, unrealistic expectation, right? So how much stability is in that board and how much, issues that the board has that are structural, whether it's, authoritarian kind of, mindset versus kind of a developmental mindset or a patient mindset versus an impatient mindset. And like, how much are you investing long-term for those investments to pay off? And how much are you looking to just flip it really quick, right? So when we bring in, when you think about hiring principals, ask yourself, like, how many candidates are out there and what are you expecting? So if you want someone with 10 years of experience being a great, phenomenal principal, the first question you'd ask is how many principals are on the job market right now with 10 years of experience that are looking for a new opportunity, right? Like that's a rare bird, the idea, and then why are they leaving in the first place? Because usually if you've been there for 10 years and you're great, probably they want to keep them too, and there's nowhere for them to go. So it's not, there might be 1 or 2 out of like 50 schools or 100 schools. So the statistical probability of that's low. Number 2 is, do they understand you, your community, your culture? So a lot of times we have to create Islamic schools that are developing. And like I always ask myself, how many principals do I have in the building right now, like that I could work on and cultivate? And I'm thinking I've got about 3 or 4 right now that I'm working on right now that are showing the potential to be a school leader, whether at our school or somewhere else someday. Like they really have the capability. They probably don't have the experience or the education yet, but they've got the fundamental, the characteristics of a great leader. And I think that there's a slide that you don't have to go back to, which is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he said that people are like mines of gold and silver. And the idea is, in our community, and I would say that in every city, there's about 10 great principals. Like if you look at, or 20 or 30 or 40, like there's a huge number in each of your cities. You just haven't found or realized it yet. Like, and they probably don't even realize it yet. I would say that both Principal Mani and Reem never thought to themselves that they were going to be principal. That was not part of their ambition. I don't think it was for Sean. I don't think it's for Dinya. Like, I think that's not their intent. It's just that they happen to be great at the things that we need and we invest in them. And so the question is, are we investing in that whole, that comes back to that PD part of our payroll. Are we investing in these folks to be future leaders? Are we giving them a chance at sub-leadership? Like, for example, okay, we're not going to give them the principal position, but are we making them a team lead over a grade or a department or over ELA or over math or over, Islamic studies or something that we can kind of get an idea of their leadership skills and how they can deliver on results and whatnot. Like, so I think at some level we have to cultivate and build those things in-house. And the other thing you talked about with is compensation and the treatment of people, right? So we have to treat people in a way that makes this attractive. I don't think our communities are going to succeed if our kids are not succeeding. And I don't think our kids are going to succeed unless we build great schools. And we can't build great schools unless we have great principals and great teachers. And we can't have great principals and teachers if we're not willing to pay for that. And if we have environments that are not fun to work at and are, ungrateful and are frustrating. So I think all of this ties together to our success. The other thing to look at is I don't think money is really a problem. Like, I don't think finance is a problem for our communities. We have no problem building, $5 million facilities a lot of times. I think, and if you look, you take 10 families, right? You take 10 families in your communities, even Knoxville, take 10 families that earned $500,000 or more household income, and you're talking about $5 million household income times 5 years, that's 25 million. You extrapolate that out, you just get 20 families versus 5. And next thing you know, 20, 30 families, you're talking about you're in the $100 million range over 5 years of income. And that's not the great community. Our problem is that we are just spending our money on residential houses and on our other things, and we're spending on our masajid, our buildings, and our infrastructure. We're not spending it on the payroll or the talent. And I think that's a challenge to think about philosophically. That's not part of this discussion today. But I've always said that in Knoxville is that there's no money shortage. We do not have a shortage of money. We might have a shortage of people willing to donate, but that we don't have a shortage of actual resources in the Muslim community. There's plenty of resources. But I think we haven't prioritized it. And so principals probably of really good schools should be making 6-figure salaries because of the sheer complexity and difficulty of what they're doing, right? And if we've got principals making 40, 50,000, then there's something really like catastrophically wrong. I mean, a small school, they should be making 80, 90,000. On these larger schools, those numbers should be significantly higher. Because think about it, like when you're a physician, the risk factor of a patient dying, the amount of resource you're being paid is a function of like the scarcity as well as the value society places on it. As values like the risk level of someone dying if you don't make a good decision. And the kids' futures are at stake with principals, right? Like, a kid having a terrible experience can lose their Islam in an Islamic school. They could just be like, I hate Islam. I hate the way I was treated. I hate everything about it. And so like you're talking about their whole akhirah is at stake. It's almost like a much higher stakes game. So you really got to feel that money doesn't solve the problem, right? So at the end of the day, you could throw money at it. If you're not making good hires and not developing, not creating good culture, all that money's not going to translate into success. But it is something to think about what your priorities are as a community.
And I will just add to that about money not being a problem. There are exceptions to that, because I do see communities where there's really are struggling, and I think that's something that, like, it's not for this particular group, but this is something for our Muslim Ummah to prioritize Islamic education, to prioritize donating or supporting Islamic schools, whether or not their children go to that school.
Well, and if you
investing
think about
in education.
And when I say money's not a problem, that's the aggregate, right? When we're looking at aggregate GDP, we're looking at aggregate income, we're looking at aggregate equity in our assets, 401ks and houses. On a specific level, even American school systems are struggling financially, right? Like, even if you look at public schools, like they're struggling, and that's not because there's not money. It's just that they're prioritizing military spending, or they're prioritizing something else over the educational system. And so that's always a thing. You could look at a school district, and we've got school districts here in Tennessee that pay, huge amounts of money to their faculty. There was a time when a Noor Academy got started, the public school system was very bad in East Tennessee. And therefore it was very easy to compete against them. And then they got this brilliant superintendent who really juiced up salaries and talent levels, and it made competition with the public school system very serious, because academically they're very capable, and they're paying very high salaries to their teachers, and that puts a lot of pressure on us as a school to kind of be able to match that to some degree. I think there's a national problem. Like the amount of resignations amongst teachers for the last 5 years is kind of shocking. Like if you look at, not talking about Islamic schools. So you're looking at, like right now, Noor Academy has massive wait lists at almost every grade. And we're really worried actually that the number of teachers wanting to be teachers in our communities is kind of bottoming out in a way that it's a national shortage of teachers, not an Islamic school shortage of teachers. There's a national supply-demand problem with people wanting to go into the field of education. A lot of it had to do with how hard it is relative to the pay, relative to the parent. Parents are tough on them, boards are tough on them, leaders are tough on them. So like, why do they want to go into such a difficult field? And so like, we just have to look at this as a massive policy problem for the whole country. But that also gives us a niche at over investing in it in a way that gives us an advantage. So we got to think about really taking advantage of that. I'm gonna, how long does the session last?
I think we had allotted about an hour and 15 minutes or so. So
I do want to talk about one thing, but then we open it up to more questions, which is so when you talk about, and this is kind of outside of my, these are domains. Okay, so we go back, these are domains. I'm going to talk about some domains that are not traditionally listed all the time. But talent acquisition, I think, for one thing I always ask Reem is like, what's your list of people you're going after to recruit? Like what talent are we adding to the school? Can you show me how we upgraded, how we grew the talent level? And that's something to think about, is like I think the number one role personally, this is my personal view, I would say there's probably two roles. One is really recruiting talent, retaining talent, developing talent. Like the quality of the teachers, the development of those teachers, and the lack of attrition, not losing great teachers, hiring great teachers is like, I love to measure that. My favorite sports season in professional sports, I don't watch any sports, I don't have time, but I love the NBA offseason because I can know right away who's going to be in the Final Four of the NBA just by what happened in the offseason. Like, who did they lose? Who did they get? Right. And so sometimes a school, you could tell how well you're going to do by at the end of the year, like which teachers left and which teachers came on board. And if you see you're losing your best people, you already know that you're going to struggle. Right. And so the idea of one of the main kind of parameters is, talent recruitment, acquisition, development, and culture. Like, I would just say that these are some massive, these few things can fix a lot of the other things. Like, if you're getting really great teachers, you could talk about scope and sequence all day long, and curriculum, and trying to develop a curriculum, and et cetera, et cetera. I'll take a great teacher over a great curriculum all day long. Okay, all day long. Because generally speaking, the curriculums and the state standards and the scope and sequence is out there, easy copy paste jobs. But the talent, because if you think about your own childhood, you can remember great teachers, right? You're not remembering great curriculum per se, but you'll remember a teacher who changed your life or set in motion a direction for you that permanently altered the course of your life, that made you confident in a certain field, gave you competence, or reassured you or gave you confidence in general about yourself. And I think that greater than the curriculum, which curriculum is important, like we don't want to downplay the fundamental pillars of a school, and curriculum is part of that. But the talent, is so critical at the execution of that curriculum, or in the absence of it, can produce really great results regardless of the curriculum. And so I think that and it makes the principal's job a lot easier. I always tell Reem, if you keep having to dealing with somebody over and over again all year long, probably you're having a failure at the teacher level. Now you have to decide, do you develop or do you have to make a change? Because if you keep having, like, great teachers resolve issues at the classroom level. They don't have to send kids to the principal's office. They're not going to send parents to the principal to try to solve a problem that could have been solved at the classroom level. And so great teachers throughout the building are going to make the principal look like a hero for no reason. A great principal has to hire and develop great staff and create a great culture. And that fundamentally is going to make their job super easy to do other things. If they don't have a deck that's fully loaded, and they've got, let's say, 10% issues, and they're going to be dealing with those, and it's going to eat up a lot of their time and energy. So I would just say that whole mines of gold and silver is so true. And in the evaluation process, I always ask Reem, is like, what's going on? And so those are some of the informal things, is of trying to figure out. We have that formally, but also informally, just asking, like, what do you think? Like, are we? And then the second part of that is recruiting great students. There was a time, we had this one kid one time, it was like 10 years ago. He was the son of a physician. He's in third grade, if that, maybe third grade, maybe second, maybe third. And the only books we could give him were collegiate level, PhD level research papers to read, because there was nothing else that this kid could read that would challenge him. And that was nothing we did. Like, this genetic, like, that kid was a freak of nature. There's nothing in our curriculum that produced that. That was just, the kid was a genius. We happened to have him. We told the parents, like, look, you got to do something with him. There's nothing we can do. He could stay here till high school and we wouldn't benefit him one iota. It's just, he's a genetic anomaly. But at some level, when you're talking about recruitment, you know, we had a kid, we had a situation where this kindergartner went home dropping an F-bomb, like using cuss words. And the parents came to us, be like, what's going on in your school? Like, they're learning this. And I'm like, it's not in our curriculum. I promise you, it's not in our curriculum. You know, that's not something we have as part of the teaching. What's happening is another kid is riding in the car with a parent who's listening to inappropriate music on the way to school. And that kid is now acquiring language from their parent and going to school and transferring it like a virus, right? So if you're trying to develop an Islamic environment, you know, your parents actually have to buy into your vision and values and culture, right? Like, if they're not willing to kind of follow that, you're going to have a hard time trying to clean up what you're bringing in a lot of times. And that's a little bit of a tough, that's a tough sell on my part, because I do recognize that we have to service the entire ummah. We have to service everyone. The Prophet ﷺ was dealing with people who were drinking and fornicating and all this stuff, and then he was transforming them. And that a great prophetic system can do that, but it can't be overrun. Like, you have to have a core group that's really holding the line and setting the tone and the example, and everyone else is falling in line, versus, you know, these kind of situations. So recruiting, like, if you really want, you know, great schools, sometimes you have to recruit great families and great committed people to that, and at least produce a proof of concept before you can, you know, volumize that, right? Like, before you kind of create volume, you have to create a core proof of concept that you've got this thing that's working at the highest levels that everyone wants to be a part of. And then when it becomes hard to get in, people will subjugate themselves just to get in, right? Like, when you're begging everyone to join the school, then you're at their mercy. They're gonna do what they want to do, right? But the idea here is, can you curate the talent? Can you curate the cohorts to produce a proof of concept? And then once you have the momentum, you're bringing in folks who want to be part of that and transforming everybody along the way. And sometimes a great Islamic school can be at the center of a community, and even if people who do not attend that school can still benefit from what it's doing to the whole community aggregately, if that makes any sense. I'm going to stop here. I think we've covered a lot of what, you know, and so from a principal perspective, you know, I remember going to a private high school when I was young, and half the class left. It was a private school. It was not an Islamic school. It was back in the 80s, 90s. And half our class left because a principal at another school had recruited half the students from this private school to another school, meaning the principal was actively recruiting the families she wanted to the school as part of her way of transforming her school. Like, and I thought that was fascinating. I wouldn't put that burden on the principal alone, but the idea of, you know, recruiting the families to the school as part of a domain, if you will, whether you delegate that to an admissions or recruitment process, whether you retain it yourself because you have capacity, whether the board feels like that's a board functionality, but, you know, a domain of recruiting people, to the right people to the building, whether it's staff, whether it's families, you know, whether it's donors, is something to think about as well.
Yeah, I think it's, I was just going to say, you know, when sending a child to a public school, you need to be extremely careful, but also have to be careful when we're sending our child to a Islamic school, and us as Islamic school caretakers needs to ensure that our students are coming in, and we have what we call family interviews, where in the beginning we ask certain questions to make sure that the students who are coming in and families who are aligned with our mission and vision, and then we have the opportunity to either say that they could be part of our school or not. And we need to make sure that our family who we're interviewing, who we're accepting in our school and enrolling, are aligned, and their family values align with ours. So I think that's a really good point. Alhamdulillah.
And then the only thing I would say to that is, I would say just be careful not to break the hearts of the people that we don't get in. You know, one of the things that we curate that, and at the same time, we don't want them to feel like that they were rejected by the Prophet ﷺ, or rejected by Allah, rejected by Islam, or something like that. So we kind of want to do things in a way that when we communicate those admissions or rejections of admissions, we just want to do it in a way that's loving and that's helpful. And that's like, we have a situation where we don't have capacity for special needs, for example, like we can't. And it's very painful for a parent to find out for the first time that their child might have autism or something of that nature. And so, to be very careful, saying this is what's going on, and giving people a chance to maybe become that which you want them to become. Like, okay, we'd love to have you. We can't at this time because, however, here's some things to work on. And if you can, we'd love to have you back and try again next year, inshallah. So, as you do that, just be mindful of that, inshallah. Got about 5 more minutes, inshallah, or I can stay as long as you need. I'm free today, but whatever you guys need. But what are some other areas? We could probably flip through the remainder of that slideshow if we need to, but I think we've covered most of it. Let's take a quick look at it to see if there's anything that sticks out. Brother Anas, I don't know if you still got that up. Let's go to the bottom of it and see if there's anything remaining. I think we may have covered most of it. So, you talked about that book, Crucial Conversations, and here's some other books that I recommend. Good to Great, Great by Choice. Those are both Jim Collins. 5 Dysfunctions of the Team is helpful, in terms of sometimes when the board isn't functioning at a high level or the teams inside the building aren't. These are some books that I recommend. If you go above to the slide above that, how might we develop in-house talent? So I think, a few things to think about is like to brainstorm around that, right? Like, so this is kind of an engineering problem of sorts, which is we have a problem, we have shortage of talent, whether it's teachers, whether it's, now let's sit down all together. Let's not dump this on the principal alone, but let's talk about like, how might we, recruit, bring more people in? What do we need to do to kind of fix the supply side of the problem, and really think about like, how are we developing the next generation of leaders? An example for us here is we do a course called the Tastier Wilderness, which is a leadership course in the field. We have we take about 20, 30, 40 young people and put them through this leadership kind of training. And it's not that they're all going to become educators, or even principals, but at least we're just trying to seed the next generation with some ideas of, in the average age is about 20 years old that goes on this trip, 20, 25. We're trying to just seed a bunch of young people with affiliation with the school, with kind of some of these ideas. And we're trying to, and right now we're recruiting, sometimes non-teachers, especially in the math and the sciences, so the idea is like, from your perspective, is like, what are you doing like to solve that in-house development issue? There's so many cities, like I would say like big cities like Dallas, Chicago, and others, Houston, so many big cities. There's got to be a lot of young people who, could be recruited into the field of education, that could be developed into future principals if we invest in them. So, that's something that I recommend every institution across the country doing, which is try to create a pipeline of people, and try to make a list of people that you think would be great if you were to invest in them. And I run a list that's 15, 20 people long. And, like, I'll give you an example. Reem, I probably recruited her for 8 years. Sean, I probably recruited him for 10 to 12 years. So sometimes you just want to recruit for long periods of time, folks that are, they tell you no a lot of times till they finally tell you yes. Brother Anas?
Jazakallah khair. Quick question. So, those formal evaluations,
Yep.
all of them have gradings, like, how do you balance, I noticed that the conversation goes well, like, how can we improve the school, this and that. But when it comes to, when you get to the point where, like here, as I give an example, not necessarily this one, but like this is an example. You have, developing, proficient, and we have, most of us, alhamdulillah, we have principals who put all of their heart in the work, right?
Yep.
And in their opinion, they're distinguished because this is what they you know what I mean? How can you take the conversation from there in a way that's not it's more developing conversation?
Yeah, I think, the idea is everyone can improve. Like, no one's perfect. I would let them fill out their own first in the situation like this, and then maybe pick a few places where you feel like, you want to really focus. One of the problems with these evaluations is they're so comprehensive that you can overwhelm yourself and everybody by trying to have too many goals in a given 12-month process. So sometimes you just want to think to yourself, like, what's the most important 1 to 2 to 3 things that we want to improve versus trying to improve 9 to 12 things, right? So sometimes you got to pick your battles and say to yourself, like, do I really care that what's the issue? Is the issue right now parent communication? Is the issue, the quality of the teachers or the being able to complete the curriculum? Is the issue the culture? Like, what's the fundamental big ticket thing, and try to distill something complicated to something simple, right? And so if you overwhelm people and if you disagree on every single thing, you're going to spend a lot of time just feeling frustrated both sides. So the idea is sometimes maybe let them fill it out, maybe maybe you fill it out in a different color, and you kind of say, well, what are some examples of that? Like, you could ask them, like, well, give me an example of distinguish. Because I think in the domain, for example, if you pick one of these domains, it says, what distinguish means, and it says what accomplished means. And you could just ask for, can you give me an example? I noticed you put distinguished. So what would be an example of that? And you could give an example of this, and you could agree to disagree too. Like, sometimes there is not a need. Like, these things are designed not to produce a score to some third party. This is for your internal use to make you better. You follow? And so it's not like this is going to get you into Harvard or something, or get you into med school. Like, this is just there to organizationally improve you. I think this is why sometimes working on a SWOT helps, because SWOTs are not one person dependent. It's kind of like a collective opinion of what is our weakness, right? So like, if you did a weakness, like everyone lists 3 to 4 weaknesses of the org. If the same ones come up over and over again, then we at least have clarity on what we all collectively think is the weakness of the school, right? Or if an opportunities, like, what are the big 5 things you would do as opportunities for the school? If 1 to 2 things keep coming up, right? Like, these are the things, then it kind of seems clear that these are the things that we think we want. So, there's methodologies for getting alignment when there's not like perfect, because 2 people getting to a perfect answer is probably not realistic. But collectively, through consensus on a SWOT, you get some kind of proof that kind of helps say, well, this is where we're at. And being conciliatory, being saying, look, we don't have to agree totally, but here's kind of where I think there's some room for better alignment, or some areas that we think we could do better. And this is what better looks like. Here's an example of what it would look like to be successful. And here's kind of example of where I think we could do better versus, the general umbrella of it.
As you did mention that you selected the one evaluation system. So this evaluation system actually, like, we talked to our principal what they use at the public school, and this is what they use, and that can help us to come to a system that kind of works for both our administration and us. And it goes, it's really nice. It goes through, it shows that, you can't just come at the end of the year say, I'm going to evaluate you.
Right.
He started with orientation, with self-assessment, evaluate assessment, and then you have to, do mid-year and end of year and final evaluation. So it is.
But here's something to look at. This is something I would tell, to give you an example of this. This is a perfect example of the issue. If you look carefully, this is all true, right? The issue is, imagine the time, like, so when a principal has so much time, you just have to be careful. Like, sometimes, in a bureaucracy, what happens is the time dedicated to, we're all short on time. So you always have to ask yourself also, like, the pros and cons of thoroughness versus capacity. Does that make sense? Like, the more thorough you are in any bureaucratic system, the more it's going to eat up capacity of the leader that's already shortchanged. So just be aware of that as you move through something that's very, like, but at the same time, if you're not doing a good job of the evaluations, and you're trying to professionalize it, these are kind of great recommendations. Remember, most of these came out of public schools, and public schools have huge budgets. So that's the only other warning I would give is like, I don't disagree with them by any stretch. I think they're great. Just be aware of capacity, if the but at the same time, the more you communicate, the more alignment you have. So it's excellent, inshallah.
Yeah, the feedback we got from our principal is that she, rather than doing early and late evaluation at the end of the year, she requested like mid-year. So just to know, to get a sense on how the school is going, not necessarily all like so many steps, just like maybe one in the middle. Yeah,
exactly. That's perfect. Yeah, no, appreciate it. I think, that's a great example of something that works. And
okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Brother Nadeem, for your time. Really appreciate it. Those of you who joined, we appreciate that too. And I would ask that if any of you are not on our CISNA leaders group or not members of CISNA, please do go to our website, join. Once you join, you'll get the links to the WhatsApp groups, which are really helpful because I think just the knowledge that we share, the networking that we do, the opportunities to hear from others, other perspectives, has been really great on those WhatsApp groups. So that's a really good resource. If Brother Nadeem, if you could close us out with dua, please.
Yeah, we'll do. I just wanted to reiterate, CISNA is critical to the success of Islam in America. Like we have to invest in CISNA. We have to wish it the best. It's an umbrella organization for all of our Islamic schools. Look at how we all got connected only through CISNA. So I think we need to utilize that resource better. We need to send our people to it. We need to send the best to it. We need to do more and more so that we can be more connected. And it's an easy vehicle to connect. It's already there. So let's use it to connect all of the Islamic schools to create like a super school district, if you will, a national school district and international school district as well. So please, let's encourage our boards to participate, encourage our principals to participate, and really and use that for connectedness and create that prophetic community through this vehicle, inshallah. May Allah put barakah in it. Allah, we ask you to choose for us what is best for us. We ask you to send in the reinforcements. We're all sitting here fighting the war in the front lines for you and for your sake alone. We ask you to send us the reinforcements for the next generation to protect our students, to invest in our students, to protect their iman, to protect our teachers, to reward them for all the work that they do, all the people at CISNA, all the board members, all the principals, all the teachers that are working so hard. We ask you to purify their intentions, to accept from them, to forgive them for any mistakes they make, to make the ummah strong, to revive the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in our hearts, to protect the Quran in the chest of every one of them. We ask you to give victory to the Muslims wherever they are. We ask you to unite the global Muslim community into a single ummah. We ask you that you raise us on Yawm al-Akhir at the Hawd of the Prophet ﷺ, drinking from his hand and seeing your countenance. We ask you to protect us all from the fire. رَبَّنَا آتِنَا فِي الدُّنْيَا حَسَنَةً وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ حَسَنَةً وَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. We ask you to convert everybody to Islam in America, that we be an example, that everyone accept Islam through the work that everyone here is doing, that everyone sees it, and they all give the shahada, and that the reason for our migration to America from wherever our families came from, that it be for spreading Islam. Yes, that everyone that gives shahada in our lifetime, that we see the miracle that happened in all over the world in previous generations, that we're part of the ummah, that brings that here to North America. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي أزواج المؤمنين وذرياته وآل بيته كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. العصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم.